will say good morning right now to everyone because we have 2 more minutes of morning. My name is Mark Curtis. I come from McGill University in Canada, and I am privileged to be chairing this session of the conference, which is entitled Session 2, Best Practices of ESD in National Parks and Protected Areas. Before I get started, I have a few things to say to everyone. To begin with, what a wonderful session it has been so far. I've very much appreciated hearing the keynote speakers this morning and the participation of the Secretary General of UNESCO in Korea, Secretary General Chun, and Mayor Yoon of Suwon City, and of course Don Wan Shin's inspired talk. As well, I particularly enjoyed Linda Rolf's presentation that immediately preceded this one, and if that's the sort of standard that we have to keep to, I think we have quite a challenge, so thank you again, Linda. I would like to acknowledge here the organizations that have made this session possible: the Korea National Park Service, UNESCO, and of course the IUCN Secretariat. And I would also like to acknowledge the people here from National Park Service, and I have a confession to make. Even though I became a professor at a university, a professor of natural resource sciences, I always wanted to be a park ranger. So, in fact, a number of people in this room are doing exactly what I would love to be doing myself, and I admire you greatly for your service in this way. I will just reiterate that this particular session, which is on best practices of ESD, is to call attention to the development and sharing of practical examples of ESD in relationship with natural parks and protected areas through learning from diverse best practices. And to that extent, we actually have a number of speakers. Because of time constraints, we are going to listen to 3 speakers now before the lunch break. And then one of our other speakers will come immediately after the lunch break in the next session, in session 3, so that each of you is aware of this. I will simply say to my colleagues who will be speaking together with me right now that we will have about 20 minutes each to speak in deference to the idea that we may see a very exciting video just before we go to lunch. I am in fact going to try to terminate my long-winded talking in only 15 minutes, so you folks can try to keep me to that, and I will be very happy to do it. So, with this in mind, what I would like to do right now is begin my talk, and we may put up the presentation, please. In doing this, I'll mention, yes, my name is Mark Curtis. I am very easy to find. You can Google me at McGill. You can just Google McGill UNEP. And I would be delighted to contact anyone here in the room further if you have more comments on the sorts of things I'm about to talk about. This title, which I'm not going to read, you can probably see it yourselves, ESD Perspective on Marine Protected Areas in Canada, in fact talks about something which was inspired by my colleague Don Wan Shin, who I have had as a visitor at McGill for 1 year, by the way, in Canada. And he has certainly been instrumental in my putting much of this together. So let's just see what this is going to look like, and in a quick 15 minutes we are going to see some key considerations. I'm going to throw those out right at the very beginning. You'll see something of Canada's network of marine protected areas. I'm going to give you a little case study. And then I'm going to talk about a subject that is close to my heart, and I hope close to yours, and that is how ecosystem-based management should be an essential part of ESD. So here's what I thought I would like to share with you in the very beginning. Already, the parks are doing a pretty good job in many instances of handling public learning, and for that matter, student learning about conservation and sustainability. And I think for the most part, in many areas, that their means of communication to the public is really pretty good. At the same time, I think it's implicit in this that we need to advance ESD in connection with marine protected areas, and that should be by highlighting how we really manage the parks, and that's ecosystem-based management. And I'd like to extend that to integrated knowledge for sustainability as a theme of this conference as well. And then I believe, and this is critical, we have to be aware of missed opportunities. I'm going to give a very quick talk here. I encourage people to look not only at the paper that I'm presenting, but particularly at the websites. There's tremendous material that is out there that not all of us are probably using. And I'm highlighting here IUCN, UNEP, and apologies for UNESCO not to having mentioned that in that bullet point. But indeed, there is a lot of material, but in my experience, we are not using as much of this as we might. And I'm going to draw attention to some things that I've been doing and some colleagues in UNEP recently that point, I think, in a good direction. So, very briefly, Canada has marine protected areas. I'm not going to go through all this with you. In fact, in our federal jurisdictions, they are either by Fisheries and Oceans Canada, by Environment Canada, or by Parks Canada. And they all, however, amount to much the same thing. They are areas set aside for the protection of biodiversity and habitats. At the same time, I would like to point out that our Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the other government ministries responsible for our marine protected areas all use the IUCN definition for a marine protected area. While I'm at it, I will mention, for those of you who may think marine protected areas are not as interesting as terrestrial places, in fact, that everything I'm going to say here applies to terrestrial habitats and parks on land, land-based parks as well. So let's just see what this looks like. I wanted to use as an example a specific marine protected area, which you might think is a terrible example because it is a couple of 100 kilometers offshore. People cannot wander through its gully because it's 2,000 meters deep and more. They cannot actively observe the wildlife very well. And you would think that, why would I use this as an example? I think I want to use it as an example because in many cases, students in schools, even students in universities, don't have an opportunity to get out to these parks. And under these circumstances, they nonetheless become active examples of wonderful possibilities for teaching. And I'm about to show you how that has happened in this case. And I hope, as an example, show you how even if we cannot get the students to the park, we can still manage to very effectively teach about sustainability. So this area called the Gully was put together as a part of the Canada Oceans Act, and in fact was Canada's very first marine protected area. And there are zones where Basically, no activity is allowed. There are zones where some fishing, longline fishing for certain fish species, haddock and swordfish is allowed. And as well, I think it's important to note that the gully, and that's just below Area 1 on this map, the gully is part of a much bigger picture, and that to me is even more important. There's something called the Eastern Scotian Shelf Integrated Management Initiative, and that covers a vast area of Canada from Newfoundland down many thousands of square kilometers. And in that area, there's been a wonderful strategic plan. This has involved universities, it has involved fishers, it has involved the shipping industry, the oil and gas industry, and the rest of it. And so this, the gully as a marine protected area is just a small part of a vast area which is being strategically managed, and I must say pretty well. Large shipping lanes have been moved around so that whales are not being bumped into. A number of other very good things have happened. So this just gives you an idea of the vastness of Canada and where the Fisheries Act has created zones in the Pacific, the Arctic Ocean, various areas of the Canadian Arctic, the East Coast, Hudson Bay, and all the way down to at the very bottom there, if you want to know where the gully is, the thing on the bottom right extremity is where this marine protected area is located. Now, let's get down to implementation, which I think is important. When teachers want to talk about the gully or a marine protected area, WWF has a wonderful guideline document with exercises for school children of various ages. And in the Canadian system, that's actually grades 5 to 8, pre-high school, but it can be adapted in either direction a bit. And the nice thing about this is it's not only there, but also teachers have taken this up, and the school teachers have their own review system for it. There are extensive footnotes and references in my paper as to what this system is like, but I think it's inspirational. It shows what can be done with this sort of operation, and I love this way the teachers themselves keep track of what's going on in this, and they call it exemplary classroom resources reviewed by teachers for teachers. I invite any of you to look at the relevant websites. We don't have time to do it here, but to me this is outstanding. Secondly, and this moves up to the university level, the law school in Dalhousie University has adopted the gully as a case study. And so this is simply one example of many of where that is being done. So again, this is all about implementation. This is about what we like to see happening. And beyond that, of course, we do have a lot of things happening, and there's just an example here of the gully is actually used and has been used by me as a example for my fisheries and wildlife management students. The top frame here is a photograph of my students and me on a research trawler where we spend about 8 or 10 days a year. Every year. The idea that these sorts of examples contribute to the broader spectrum of ESD, I think is important. The other slide actually has one of my colleagues in Geneva at the United Nations Environment Program lecturing to our students at McGill who are in a web conferencing room. Now, as you all know, we don't even need web conferencing rooms for this. You can do this by Skype. And I would just like to encourage people here to utilize these sorts of resources as much as possible, because I'm very happy to do this. I sit in my home office and just gave a lecture at Tongji University in China a couple of weeks ago. So let's open up ourselves a little bit more to doing this and understand there are lots of people like myself who have endless time on their hands who would be very, very happy to help you facilitate these things. How am I doing for time? Pretty good. Finally, let's talk about ecosystem-based management, which as someone who's taught natural resource sciences for many years is close to my heart. And of course, it's based on the ecosystem approach, which again is something that most of you will know as part of the system devised by the Convention on Biological Diversity. CBD Secretariat, by the way, is in Montreal, very close to where I live. So I have a great affection for my colleagues there. And I must say the ecosystem approach as a management strategy is really the way that Canada has gone. I'm aware that Korea as well has embraced this. And certainly the informing of students of all levels about this ecosystem approach, which is integrative, is extremely important. But then I would have to say that it follows that advancing ESD in connection with marine protected areas, or parks in general, involves demonstrating the importance of ecosystem-based management. And that actually happens quite a bit in universities, but I have to say, much to my sadness, that universities do not tend to use national parks to the extent that they should in their teaching, and I'm hoping that as a result of this session today, that may increasingly begin to change. So the other part of it, though, is I must, and I work very closely now with the Environmental Education Training Unit, EETU, in Nairobi, which is part of UNEP. As much as material is put out by UNEP, by IUCN, by UNESCO, I do not see the appearance of this nearly enough in university courses, high school courses, the places where I think it could be used. So I'm going to plead with all of us to try to see that this actually begins to take place so that we see their uses more and more, and the agencies themselves, of course, have a role in seeing that does happen. Just as one example, I finished writing this thing about 2 months ago. It was launched in Shanghai, in fact, actually in June. Ecosystem Management Graduate Curriculum Development Sourcebook. I am not flogging this or advertising it for my personal pleasure. I'm just saying that these are the sorts of things we need. We're encouraging teachers to implement, but we're not giving them the materials, we're not making it easy. So, oh, and by the way, I wrote another one, which is graduate curriculum for the green economy, and which came out at the same time. So anyway, we've got to have these things available, and I'm simply helping people here to be aware that they are out there. I'm encouraging all of you to participate in doing more and more of these things, because when we speak to teachers about teaching more of the stuff that we want them to teach, but we don't deliver the goods on what's out there and how to structure their courses and how to set up these programs and get them going, nothing's going to happen. So I know we can make the good things happen. Finally, I have a little quote from Dongwan Shin, understanding that fundamental disciplines of human knowledge cannot by themselves provide the sufficient and necessary solutions to complex problems of sustainability. We really have to look beyond this. He has a wonderful paper, which I reference, that talks about different types of knowledge. And I'm not going to go into the details of any of these, but just to tell you that the third one's worth knowing about: reconciliatory knowledge. That's what decision makers need. That's what governments need. That's what international agencies need. And in our communicating to them an understanding of reconciliatory knowledge, which actually brings together much of the stuff that we are talking about here today, is extremely valuable. I'll discuss that with anyone at any time during this conference. Thank you. Finally, and this is my conclusion, the extent to which progress can be made in this complementary, unexplored area of knowledge integration, and that's what you are all doing, and we're stepping in the right directions. I think Linda has just shown us that. Is for sustainable development, this can be instrumental in furthering ESD. I think over and above everything else that happens, teaching people to think in these ways is empowering and should be celebrated. So with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much. And we have decided that the best way to proceed right now actually is, rather than entertaining questions, we are going to save this for this afternoon, when in fact during the first session one of our speakers, who is not going to be able to speak right now because of time constraints, is going to make her presentation. That's pretty there. And in fact, so what we're going to do is we're going to follow up